On March 2nd, Nvidia invested $4 billion into two companies most people have never even heard of. Not an AI model company, not a chip designer. Two companies that make components out of light. In that same week, Marvell closed a $3.25 billion acquisition of a photonics startup. That's over $7 billion flowing into one corner of the supply chain in just a matter of weeks. And when that kind of capital moves that fast, something fundamental is shifting. First things first, I'm not here to hold you captive, so here's everything I'll cover in this video. First, I will break down what photonics is and the vital role it will play in the AI build-out. And secondly, I will share with you my top 10 stock picks, which will allow you to capitalize on the photonics multi-level layer. So let's dive in. Here are my top 10. Nvidia, Marvell Technology, Lumentum, Fabrinet, Broadcom, Cisco, Intel, Global Foundries, Taiwan Semiconductor, and Tower. But if you're anything like me, you need to know the why. So let's cover the why. Jensen Huang stood on stage at GTC 2025, and 2 hours into his keynote, he said 5 words. This is really crazy technology. I've covered Nvidia for 7 years. I've watched every GTC keynote since 2019. Jensen doesn't use language like that casually. When he calls something crazy, he's not hyping. He's warning the industry that the rules are about to change, and he was specifically talking about silicon photonics. On the screen, Jensen Huang displayed the QuantumX switch, a liquid-cooled package with 18 silicon photonics engines. The throughput is 4.8 terabits per second. The power efficiency is 3.5 times better than anything shipping today. Then he came with technical breakdown. TSMC's fabrication process with 220 million transistors stacked on 1,000 photonic integrated circuits. This is light replacing electricity at the physical substrate level. By the end of that presentation, I understood why Nvidia was going all in on photonics, and why every other hyperscaler would have to follow. Here's the calculation that changed everything. An AI factory with 1 million GPUs requires roughly 2.4 million optical transceivers using conventional technology. Those transceivers consume 24 megawatts of power. That's 10% of the entire data center's energy budget being consumed entirely by moving data between chips, not processing it, not training models, just shuffling bits. Nvidia's silicon photonics approach cuts that 3.5 times. Which means you just freed up 17 megawatts of power capacity. At any typical data center, that's $12 to $18 million in annual savings. But here's what matters more than the cost savings. That 17 megawatts can now power additional GPUs. Same building, same grid connection. That provides 40 to 50% more in AI compute capacity from the same physical infrastructure. This isn't incremental optimization. This is a fundamental shift in how AI infrastructure scales. I'll be honest, I have ignored photonics for years. Silicon photonics has been 5 years away for 2 decades. I've read the research papers, seen the MIT demos, and attended the conference presentations where PhDs show beautiful slides about theoretical bandwidth improvements. None of it ever shipped at scale. So when I first heard about photonics startups raising hundreds of millions in 2023 and 24, I assumed it was another wave of venture capital chasing hype. I was definitely wrong. 3 things converged in 2025 that made photonics suddenly viable. First, AI training clusters hit an actual physics wall with copper interconnects. At 800 gigabytes per second and climbing toward 1.6 terabytes per second, copper becomes exponentially power-hungry and thermally unstable. You physically cannot scale to million GPU systems on copper at any price point. Second, TSMC's COUPE process matured to production-ready yields. You can now fabricate photonics on die with silicon in the same manufacturing step. That eliminates the cost premium that killed previous attempts at commercialization. And third is that the economics have flipped. Whereas 5 years ago, photonics cost 3 to 4 times more upfront than copper, today at hyperscale, photonics is now cheaper when you account for total cost of ownership, which includes power, cooling, physical space, and operational reliability. When I saw Jensen lay out those numbers at GTC, 4 times fewer lasers, 63 times better signal integrity, and 10 times network resiliency, I realized this wasn't research anymore. Nvidia shipped Quantum-X switches in the first half of 2025. And that's a production timeline, not a research and development roadmap. So let me try to break all of that down and simplify what's actually happening with silicon photonics. As of right now, inside every major AI data center, thousands of chips need to talk to one another, and they do that by sending data through copper cables. Today's fastest connections run at about 800 gigabytes per second, and copper can barely even handle that. So the next generation doubles it to 1 trillion bits per second. And at that speed, copper begins to fall apart. Because there's too much heat, there's too much power. On top of all of that, the signal itself begins to degrade even over short distances, because it's an exponential problem. And in this case, that's not a software problem that you can just simply fix with a patch. It's a physics wall. And this is where silicon photonics comes into play. Instead of pushing electrical signals through copper, you push light through tiny glass pathways etched directly into a silicon chip. Same kind of chip manufacturing that the semiconductor industry already knows how to do. It's just with photons instead of electrons. Speaking of what matters, the part that does is the electricity bill. A single AI data center today can consume as much power as a small city. Think of 100 megawatts or more. When you double the data rate, copper's power consumption doesn't just double, it actually scales exponentially. And this is where photonics completely changes the entire economics. At the individual link level, optical connections are 3 to 3.5 times more power efficient than copper. Now multiply that across an entire data center with 40 to 50,000 links. That's not just a 5% improvement. Every hyperscaler that's building out AI infrastructure, think Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, they're all running into the same wall right now. That's why the money is moving so quickly, and the market reflects that urgency. Silicon photonics is roughly a $3 billion market today, and it's growing roughly 25 to 29% annually. Conservative estimates put it around $10 billion by 2030. But the most aggressive projections say it's going to be closer to $30 billion by 2034. In my mind, this is not a nice-to-have technology, it's an absolute must-have. Every data center is going to have to make this shift, and everybody already knows it. That's why Nvidia committed $4 billion to this space in a single day. Looking at this at a high level, I think about this space the way that you would think about a basic building. Of course, you're going to have your base layer. There's massive companies where photonics is a growing piece of something much bigger. Then there's the middle layer. These are the foundries and the contract manufacturers that physically make the transition even possible. And then there's the top layer, which are the pure play names with the most direct exposure and, of course, the highest upside. Nvidia is investing heavily into this space. So let's go ahead and start right there. Nvidia doesn't just sell chips anymore. They sell the entire rack-scale AI supercomputers. Their latest platform, Vera Rubin, ships in the second half of 2026, and it packs 72 Rubin GPUs and 36 CPUs into a single rack with 1.3 million components. And here's what matters for this video. Silicon photonics is built directly into this system. The Spectrum 6 Ethernet switches use integrated silicon photonics, delivering 5 times better power efficiency than the traditional network. The Super 6 run at 1.6 terabytes per second per GPU, the exact speed where copper really begins to hit the wall. Photonics isn't an accessory in this system. It is the entire infrastructure that really makes this work. Look at it this way. When Jensen Huang builds something into the Nvidia platform, the supply chain is going to quickly follow. It happened with CUDA, it happened with InfiniBand, now it's happening with photonics. Of Nvidia's $215 billion in fiscal 2026 revenue, $197 billion came from data center alone. That's the market that these photonics companies are really going to be selling into. And it's just the beginning, and it's just accelerating. Staying within the base layer, the next company is Broadcom, where they are the current industry leader in co-packaged optics, which means they're just integrating optical components directly onto the networking chip instead of plugging them in separately. And they happen to be on their third generation of this technology, running at 200 gigabits per lane, and a fourth generation at double that speed is already committed to. And silicon photonics is still just a small piece of their total revenue today. But as every data center on the planet begins to make this transition, it becomes a meaningful growth layer on top of an already dominant business. Moving on to the next company in the stack, which is Cisco, where most people know them as the backbone of enterprise networking. And that's exactly why they're going to be in the space too. They acquired a company called Luxtera back in 2019, which was one of the original leaders in silicon photonics. Since then, they've been building their own photonics integrated circuits and digital signal processors in-house. They're already making 800 gigabit silicon photonic transceivers within today's data centers. And they showed a co-packaged optics prototype in a 25 terabit per second switch. Hopefully you can see it. This is the direction where everything is heading. Already Cisco is on track for its strongest revenue year ever. Silicon photonics isn't why you're going to buy Cisco today, but it's why Cisco stays relevant. As every data center transitions from copper to optical, the company selling the switches and the optics that go within each of them is sitting in a very comfortable position. AI infrastructure doesn't just stop at data centers. It extends into defense, where autonomous systems are the next massive frontier. Now I'll move on to the last company within the base layer, which happens to be Intel. And I know Intel is a little bit of a controversial pick, and that the stock has been through quite a lot. But here's what most people are missing. Intel is arguably the most advanced company in the world when it comes to silicon photonics research. They've been at this for over 25 years, and they've shipped more than 8 million photonic integrated circuits with over 32 million on-chip lasers. No one else is even close to that type of volume. Their optical compute interconnect chiplet, the OCI, does 4 terabytes per second bidirectionally. That means it can go both directions, and it consumes just 5 picojoules per bit, compared to 15 for traditional pluggable modules. That's a 3-time power efficiency advantage. And here's the kicker. Intel is the only foundry on the planet that offers an optics-based foundry option for its customers. That means that other companies can come to Intel and say, hey, build me a custom chip with photonics integrated directly into the package. To me, that happens to be a massive strategic asset. They are high risk, but the upside is significant if they happen to execute. Now let's go ahead and move up to that middle layer where silicon literally meets light at manufacturing scale. Foundries and contract manufacturers, the companies that take a design and turn it into something you can actually ship. And here's how you begin to know that this layer really matters. Think Taiwan Semiconductor. The world's largest foundry just announced a dedicated platform for mass-producing photonic components in 2026. I'm sorry, but when TSMC builds an entire production line for a particular technology, that's the ultimate validation signal. The company is already entrenched in this space, and they have a bit of a head start. And in semiconductor manufacturing, head starts compound very quickly. So let me show you who's already there. The name I'm going to start with is Tower Semiconductor. They are a specialty foundry, and they don't design chips, They manufacture them for other companies. When someone designs a photonic integrated circuit, Tower is the one fabricating it on silicon wafers at scale across their fabs within the US, Israel, and Japan. They run multiple photonics platforms, including one with lasers built directly onto the silicon. And their CEO said it plainly. They are by far the leading foundry in silicon photonics. Revenue from that segment hit $228 million in 2025, more than doubling from the year before. They've committed $920 million to expand the capacity by more than 5 times, with over 70% already reserved through 2028, and it's backed by customer prepayments. They already have a direct partnership with Nvidia to build 1.6 terabyte optical modules. And now we're going to move to the next company, Global Foundries. Where Tower is the specialist, Global Foundries is the scale player, one of the largest contract chip manufacturers in the world, with fabs in the US, Germany, and Singapore. Their edge is combining silicon photonics fabrication with advanced packaging, so they can build the optical chip and the complete module all under one roof. They doubled photonics revenue to over $200 million in 2025, and they expect to nearly double it again in 2026. Management says that they are on a path to a $1 billion run rate by 2028. Doubling itself once is interesting. 3 years in a row is a full-on signal. But photonics is only about 3% of their total revenue, and the overall top line has been relatively flat. So in this case, patience is a little bit of a requirement. Next up, let's move on to the name that ties this entire middle layer together, and that's Fabrinet. They're a precision contract manufacturer based in Thailand, and they don't design anything. Other companies design the product, and Fabrinet just builds it at scale. So you've got laser modules with 100 gigabit and 1.6 terabit transceivers, optical engines for co-packaged optics, all assembled in over 2 million square feet of factory space, with sub-micron alignment tolerances. That kind of precision is extremely difficult to replicate, which is why customers rarely leave once they're qualified on Fabrinet's lines. So here's why this name is underappreciated. Remember the 2 companies that received $2 billion each from Nvidia at the top of this video? Well, here's a little bit of a secret. They both manufacture through Fabrinet. That money flows through as increased manufacturing orders. Fabrinet benefits from every single dollar that's spent in this space without bearing the technology risk. Their financial profile is extremely clean. Their book value doubled in just 5 years. So if you want the safest entry point into silicon photonics, this one might just be it. If you are finding this video valuable, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. That really helps me out, and it lets me know to make more content like this. Now let's move on to the juicy top layer. These are the pure play photonics. These companies live or die by how fast this transition begins to happen. The first company at this layer is Coherent, and this is the world's largest vertically integrated photonics company. They make the laser chip, package it into optical engines, and they assemble the final transceiver module, all under one roof. Most competitors only play in one of those layers. They're also one of only 2 companies on the planet that's making both indium phosphide and silicon photonic engines on all that scale. Their revenue roughly 5 times from $1.1 billion in 2028 to $6.3 billion just over the past trailing 12 months. So their most recent quarter was at $1.7 billion, and that's the best in their company history. The gross margins are recovering from 30 to 36%. And on March the 2nd, Nvidia announced a $2 billion strategic investment with a multi-year purchase commitment. All that, and they have a PEG ratio of about 1.1. And now I'm going to move on to Lumentum, and they make the lasers that power the entire photonics ecosystem. Every silicon photonics chip needs an external laser because silicon can't efficiently generate light on its own. Lumentum's lasers go inside other companies' products, including their competitors, so they're going to win regardless of who takes transceiver market share. In under 2 years, this company went from a $547 million net loss to $252 million in trailing net income. And not to be outdone, Nvidia announced that same $2 billion deal structure here, the largest laser commitment in Lumentum's history. And one of the items that I look at is their PEG ratio, which is 0.61. It happens to be the cheapest in this entire photonics universe. Now we'll move on to the last name of this top layer, and that's Marvell technology. Their digital signal processing chips go inside virtually every 800 gigabit transceiver that's on the market today. That's roughly 50% of the market share. When light comes out of a photonic chip and needs to be interpreted as data, that's Marvell's silicon doing all the work. And they also design custom AI chips for Amazon and Google. In February of 2026, they closed a $3.2 billion acquisition of Celestial AI, a company that's building optical chiplets that connect computing chips using light instead of electrical traces. It's 25 times greater bandwidth at 10 times lower latency than current approaches. And if that happens to hold up in production, it changes how entire data centers are going to be wired together. Their quarterly revenue nearly doubled over the last 8 quarters, from $1.1 billion to $2.2 billion. And their adjusted earnings per share tripled from 24 to 79 cents. The shining light is the fact that the company shows persistent GAAP losses, and that's entirely from that $1.3 billion a year in amortization from that prior acquisition. But if you look at their cash flow basis, the business is extremely healthy. And for those of you that are value seekers, this company is sitting at a pay ratio of 64 cents. And they have an earnings report that's going to be coming up pretty soon that's going to be the first to potentially include Celestial AI, and it's going to set their fiscal guidance for 2027. So it's very high stakes, and it could be a bit of a catalyst. When we look at all the layers of photonics, here they are, and these are my top 10 companies. Now, here's how I break that data out, based on what I see as the strongest outcome when it comes to photonics. And just keep in mind that I invest asymmetrically. I tend to put a little bit more heavily towards the mega caps and less into those smaller companies with higher risk ratings. Here's the bottom line. Copper is hitting a physics wall. Every major hyperscaler knows it, and over $7+ billion moved into the space in just a matter of a couple of weeks. Just to prove that point, silicon photonics is no longer speculative. It's going to be the next foundation layer of the AI infrastructure. The only real question is which companies are going to capture the most value as this transition truly begins to accelerate. But if you believe we're still in the early innings of this multi-year photonics build-out, then these top 10 stock picks makes it a great way to get rich without getting lucky. And if you want to see what else I'm buying to get rich without getting lucky, consider checking out my next video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this is the X-Invest Hunter. My name is Martine, reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you, and that you only need to be right one time to change your life.